Hi, everybody. This is Eric Hines, curator of film at Museum of the Moving Image. Thanks for tuning in again for the Reverse Shot Happy Hour, or if it's your first time visiting us, thank you for joining us for the first time for the Reverse Shot Happy Hour. We've been doing this for a few months, starting back in the darkest days of the pandemic here in New York, as a way to remain connected during this time. It remains a difficult time to remain connected in a physical sense, both in terms of our building at the museum, in terms of our friends in the film world and beyond. So we appreciate your joining us. We appreciate the help that you've given us over this time at the museum. Still really dependent on a lot of donations and membership signups. So please keep that in mind as you tune in and join us over time. As you join us for any of these events online, please keep that in mind. And I want to sort of also make an announcement here. If you didn't know prior to this happy hour, something we've been working on for several months is now live, is real, which is the Queens Drive-In, which is a collaboration that Museum of the Moving Image is having with New York Hall of Science in Corona, Queens, and Rooftop Films. Our first screening will be August 13th, and we'll be showing Michael Almereyda's Tesla. And it'll be a fully operational, basically 5 to 7 day a week venue for the course of several months. And we are going to be showing repertory cinema as well as new festival films and a lot of science related programming that we often present at the museum, but then also in collaboration, in this case, with New York Hall of Science. So really, really thrilled that this is happening. And so please come on out to the drive-in. So without further ado, I'd love to bring on our hosts for the Reverse Shot Happy Hour. Our friends, our longtime friends at Reverse Shot, who, by the way, are involved at the drive-in. Their long-standing association with the museum through the See It Big series will have its birth at the drive-in via See It Big, The Future Is Now. Basically sci-fi films that speak directly to this moment. So we're excited to be continuing that collaboration with them, and we're excited to bring them to you today for the happy hour. So let's welcome the editors and founders of Reverse Shot, Michael Koresky and Jeff Reichert, and longtime contributor and filmmaker, Farihah Zaman.
Thank you for that intro, Eric.
Hey, everybody. Hey, Eric, can we walk up to the drive-in? I don't have a car. What does that mean?
Yeah, no, this is, thanks for bringing up the toughest point to talk about. I appreciate, Jeff. It's a celebration and public presence and screenings, but you're going to go right for the thing that's hard to talk about. But that's cool, which is that, no, it's not legal to do public gatherings right now in New York, at least through September of any sort. So it has to be a drive-in. It has to be a drive-in. We're working hopefully with some sponsors who will supply some folks with cars who don't have cars.
Oh my God, that's so cool.
Well, hopefully that will happen. So if you know any like solid, local potential partners for that, they likely will have that for certain events, but it would be great to be able to do that throughout the run, because of course I'm also somebody who doesn't have a car, who has to figure out how to get to my own place of business and coming.
Can I ask a question? Does Jeff's beard count as a car?
What is it a vehicle for? I think it's more of a growth than a...
It's certainly transporting things.
Yeah, but it's not gasoline powered. It doesn't have a combustion engine, so at least not yet.
Is it powering him, or it's something that's dragging him? I think which one is
powering his ego.
I was going to say something about the ego. Thank you, Dave.
Yeah, all
right. I'm teasing. He really loves his beard, and like, bless him. If you can enjoy something about quarantine life, I support it.
Eric was dropped out of this conversation.
Eric is done talking about your beard. He's already bored of this show, and he's gone.
Well, then I'll just say hi to Jeff and Farihah instead. Who needs Eric? Hi, guys.
I kind of miss Eric.
We'll see him again at the end.
How have you been? How's your week been?
I don't know why feel like there are large macro patterns in how we socialize, but I have found that I've had a really tougher week than usual for no particular external circumstances. And in speaking with friends, including the two of you, have heard similar things. Like, no one can sleep, and we can't blame the fireworks or whatever anymore. I just feel like an insane person, and my circadian rhythm is totally off. But it made waking up for mid-evening lightning storm pretty nice.
The lightning was incredible. Yeah, as I was saying earlier, I just offline to you that there were months went by when I would wake up and I wouldn't remember any of my dreams. And this week it was just like one nightmare after another. This was nightmare week. I just had the strangest dreams. I'm not going to talk about this. That's not what the show is. Even though cinema is like a dream.
Well, yes,
I'm not going to talk about dreams.
I think cinema deals with dreams specifically because it's a way of interpreting your dreams in a way that is compelling to share with other people, as opposed to just trying to like describe a series of narrative events that happened with no link.
This is very true, which I'm not going to do.
I am curious about like the general nature of your night, like what constitutes a nightmare for Michael Koresky.
Yes, please. Let's get into this.
I just wanted broad strokes, like, home invasion, ghosts in the attic, World War III.
Home invasion stuff. Now it's more about like abandonment. Yeah, it's really fun. Let's talk about it.
I sometimes have, whenever I have a home invasion dreams, it's always like, and you better save everybody or they'll all be dead. It's always like some sort of personal responsibility that seems completely impossible.
Which brings us to movies.
In some way, yes.
Well, we wanted to mark that today's a holiday that I at least celebrate, because if you don't talk about it or share it or mark it in some way, every day is the fucking same. And even in this time when we're like not able to be with our families, I think it's important to like observe some sort of version of ritual. At least it's been healthy for me. So today is Eid. People sometimes get confused because they're like, didn't Eid just happen? There are two Eids that celebrate sort of different moments of the Islamic calendar. Also, the Islamic calendar goes by the lunar calendar, which is why they also constantly shift when in the year it is. So yes, we did just recently have Eid. It is Eid again. Eid Mubarak, everyone. And also, just like last Eid that we talked about on the show, there's been a horrific flood in Bangladesh where my family's from. Everyone's safe, but I just wanted to like ask everyone to like keep people in their thoughts, or if you're in a position to donate to local charitable organizations like BRAC is a really good one, BRAC, that work really directly with communities and try to bring food, supplies, water. I have to say that like for a country that has so many fewer resources than the one that I currently live in, they have handled like evacuating flood-prone communities during a pandemic so incredibly well. It's like all about kind of understanding the local needs of communities and how they're particularly set up. So I'm moved by that and just sort of like thinking about the continued difficulties that, communities are facing because unfortunately the pandemic does not hit pause on your other problems like global warming. I also wanted to talk a little bit about the theme this week, which I'm excited about. It was inspired by one of our guests today, which is coming around. So it's about, we've focused on quite a few shows about like the things that we miss and sort of like the things that are difficult about pandemic life. I think there's also a way in which the increased time gives you kind of reflection that we don't have when we're like deep in festival mode, let's say, or kind of like responding to things as they happen, where you're like, wait a minute, now that I've revisited this genre, I have a completely new relationship to it, or have a newfound appreciation, or perhaps a newfound intense dislike. So that kind of turning point was interesting to us. Brought up by our first guest today, Stephen Cohen, who is a Chicago-based filmmaker. And then later we're going to have joining us Bedatri Choudhury, who's a critic, writer, and frequent reverse shot contributor. So I think it's a good time to bring on Stephen. Are you ready, Stephen? Mr. Stephen Cohen.
Mr. Stephen Cohen.
Oh, hi.
Hey.
Princess Sid is featured on the IMDb page today.
What a revelation that was. It was right there on my IMDb.
Yeah, perfectly timed with the reverse shot happy hour.
You'll be surprised to know that we did not make that happen. We did not pull our powerful strings around the IMDb community to make that happen.
It does beg the question, though, Michael, why, because Michael's shared the screenshot. Michael, why were you on IMDb before noon?
Oh, I'm on IMDb all hours of the day. I mean, and it's not because I'm like checking the rankings to see if the Shawshank Redemption is still number one.
That was so specific. It makes me feel like that is why.
There's just always something to fact check in something that I'm doing. Always.
Oh.
So
Can you tell us what you were fact checking, or no? That's off.
I don't know. I don't remember. It happened so frequently. Like I was copy editing something and I was fact checking. It might have had to do with. We actually posted a really great interview today between Nick Pinkerton and the Ross brothers, who were on last week's Happy Hour, about the new film Bloody Nose, Empty Pockets. And I think I was fact checking something about the cast list of that movie or something. But yeah, see, not interesting. What is interesting is the fact that Princess Sid was like the first thing that you saw. And it was part of a category of like summer flings or something.
Summer love. What to watch, summer love. And the thing is, it completely applies. It's just not like the like beautiful, subtle mode of your film is not often highlighted in that kind of list in such a mainstream way. And I was really happy to see it there. It is a summer love story, but in a different storytelling mode than we typically see.
I'm curious though, what are the other two films? Because it says it's still up right now if you go to IMDb.
Well, now, Jeff, you're getting into
romantic
provocative territory. Let's all. Can we not continue to bask in the glow? One of their, I think one was Waves. Is that true? No.
You know what? I'm gonna look right now.
The movie Waves as a summer.
No, maybe not. Maybe they just cut to a. This barely feels worth it. But I think a Netflix. There's like a Netflix rom-com or something.
Let's couch this. Yeah.
Yeah,
Well,
I think that's a good idea.
I thought it would be great, Stephen, for you to talk about there were a couple of things that you mentioned just when we were discussing the show and like what's been on your mind this week. There were a few things that you just sort of organically said, like, you know, I've kind of come around on this entire category of thing lately, and I want to hear more.
Yeah, well, you asked for ideas, and that I mean that list of 7 or 8 items took me. I mean, it's 10 seconds, so like I'm very aware of the things that are in front of my mind. So I literally just, I think it literally ranged from Ralph Waldo Emerson to the Golden Girls, which are two things that have very much been on my mind, especially over the last couple of weeks.
Yeah.
So always happy to come back and talk that gang. Yeah, but no, something, because it is a movie thing we're doing, and have found myself sort of not really even rediscovering, but sort of discovering more of Billy Wilder's work that I didn't know about. He was a filmmaker that I never particularly liked, and it was sort of an unfair judgment because you know, it was just the sort of 3 or 4 canonical things that I had seen. And then literally, I pulled it off the shelf. I have props. But literally discovering the private life of Sherlock Holmes, not during quarantine, but I think last year was like the biggest revelation of last year, and just made me realize you really have to be careful about casting judgments on artists having only tapped into 10% of the work. I mean, he does have kind of a reputation of being kind of a nasty, cynical, dark-hearted person at times, solely based on, I guess, Sunset Boulevard and Double Indemnity and Ace in the Hole. But I mean, Private Life of Sherlock Holmes knocked me flat like no movie I've discovered in the last couple of years. It's this gorgeous, haunting, beautiful, just completely moving, bonkers thing. And then I was like, okay. And then I looked at Avanti, and then I looked at Love in the Afternoon, and then I looked at Sabrina, and I'm still just, and Major and the Minor. And I'm like, okay, you really have to take a close look, especially at filmmakers who have been actively working for, or who had been actively working for 4 or 5 decades to just sort of pinpoint these couple. Anyway, so I'd always thought his films were sort of closed texts that were not open and inviting, and that the comparison previously I thought the comparison to Lubitsch seemed superficial and not even accurate, and then, but I don't know, there is when he allowed himself to open up and embrace lightness and beauty, he was capable of very magical, complicated things. And so I find myself coming around to Wilder a little bit. And then the other thing, do you want me to keep talking about this topic?
Well,
Yeah, and I really want you to tell us more about this next one because it's just so big.
The other thing I've come around to?
Yes.
Animation?
Yes, because I'm like, when I read that, I was like, what do you mean? Like all of animation?
Well, I mean, it might not surprise anyone that I haven't spent, well, I don't want to, I've always loved animated films, and I have loved movies that are animated in the past. My sort of go-to genres have not been the sort of realm of magical invented places and you know, sort of the extreme of that is a fantasy genre, which I still am haven't quite locked into. But I don't know. This goes to this idea that in my late 30s I've come around to lots of different things that I did non-movie related, like birds and nature and astronomy and 19th century literature and a sort of immersion in history. That lots of things are happening in my late 30s I didn't see coming at all. And if I can connect it too, I have another problem. My grandfather made this duck, and he's passed away, but he used to carve wood, and here he is in the newspaper making this thing.
Oh wow!
And he passed away at 97 a couple years ago, and I just want to connect this to animation because there's this idea in my late 30s, this idea of like handcrafted expressions of interior life suddenly are taking on a whole new thing to me. I've never really been interested in trinkets or objects on a shelf that have no practical purpose until I hit like 38. And then I was like, these are human expressions of imagination. And I think similarly, sort of over the past year, sort of looking at animation in a new way, at this idea that people for 100 years have been literally creating something from nothing and lifting us out of our lives and creating worlds that we believe in. And so whereas 10 years ago or in college, I might have glazed over a little bit at seeing the latest Disney release or whatever, I don't know, there's something moving to me now about the technology and what's been accomplished over the last 100 years. I mean, I'm not gonna lie, I think I've also I'm really interested in sort of like older veteran filmmakers sort of discovering technology. I mean, whether it's Zemeckis or you know, this, and I think they see the same thing. And there is something sort of Emersonian about it and American about it, of like transcending and this idea that we're a part of something bigger, and that you know, I don't know. Now I'm trailing off. Well, I wasn't trailing off in my mind. I was going to go somewhere new, but then I censored myself because this is not the time nor the place. But anyway, yes. So now
now we have to know, what was the new?
Well, no, I'm just thinking of Emerson. I'm reading this amazing biography of Emerson by Robert D. Richardson, who also just happened to pass away a few weeks ago. And he references something that C.S. Lewis said, you know, we often think that religion and that myth, that's the metaphor, but C.S. Lewis said something like, you know, it's actually the reverse, like we're the metaphor. And we're emerging from an unseen force. And to me, that opened up animation for me, you know, that who says that, I know Michael loves Fantasia, who says that that's the, you know, maybe we're the expression or something, you know, like what, I don't know. I don't know. Anyway, these are all things that are happening and in my soul. And
someone from the audience is curious what animated films you're interested in at the moment, or what's what films have brought you to this place?
Well, some of them have been disappointing. They haven't all been like amazing. I mean, actually revisiting some of the sort of canon Disney classics has been a little bit underwhelming, in fact. So it's not specific films necessarily. Although I will say that I did watch Bambi last week, and it seems to me clearly the greatest, maybe the greatest thing animated film ever made. It was like, again, it's sort of boldly isn't relying on a traditional narrative. It's all of life in 70 minutes. It's like walking into the National Gallery. It's like all of these things at once. It's incredible. So Bambi is the latest one that
the hand-drawn Disney features of the early 40s, I think, are a very particularly special, tight era in American filmmaking. There's never been anything.
I didn't know about the critical line between how movies pre-war were accepted versus, and it's true, if you watch Bambi and Cinderella back to back, there is something there's something very sort of hasty and rushed.
Pinocchio, Fantasia, Bambi, and many people think Dumbo. I'm not a huge Dumbo. It's good. But that is the skill and the beauty and the soul that are on display in those films are unlike anything else, in our national cinema. But
I revisited all of them and liked them all, but Bambi is the one that really overwhelmed me. It's that thing that, you know, Godard, what Godard said about Balthazar, this contains all of life or something. I don't know. Anyway, it reminded me, it almost has a kind of Brissonian, like, here's the deal. You're born, you maybe have a kid, maybe someone that you love gets shot in the woods, and then you grow up and hopefully you have that your kids have kids. And anyway.
Rewatching Princess Sid this week, the summer love classic, Princess Sid. It's unsurprising to me that of that canon, they're all equally beautiful in the aesthetic and the animation style, as Michael pointed out, but it's interesting to me what resonated for you in terms of your interest in the films that you make in that particular story. Like, it's one that actually, I think, like Princess, it doesn't overly rely on a romantic narrative, which is a feature of many, many Disney films, not as much the early ones, but it usually like that's the sort of turning point. And Bambi's an unusual example, and it does also deal a lot with family relationships and, you know, life and death cycles, which is sort of like a gentle but continuing preoccupation throughout your film.
That's interesting. I wish I'd seen Bambi before I made it. Maybe I would have, I don't know, made some interesting choices. But but it is funny that just, you know, Bambi's reputation is based on the fact that the mom is killed, spoiler alert, but it's like 20 seconds of the movie, and it's so much more than that. But yes, to your point, very interested in sort of the purity of life cycles and sort of almost a folk sort of tale kind of sensibility of how can we distill this narrative to its essence and still hold on to some sort of complexity and fun.
Mm-hmm.
This actually reminds me, and what you were just saying, Farihah, reminds me of the conversation we were having not long ago, Stephen, where you were talking about Princess Sid in relation to fairy tales, mm-hmm. and how you saw it as, like you were saying, Farihah, as a version of a fairy tale, very modernized, up to date. And I wonder if were there actually certain animated films that you thought that, not being a fan earlier, that you thought you were sort of correcting in a sense in making Princess Sid? I know that's maybe a leading question.
No, it was movies like, well, I mean, Sid is, on one hand, it's like, it was Stealing Beauty, their Bertolucci. And on the other hand, it was like The Secret Garden, and which is, I think, Agnieszka Holland. Yeah, what I don't know how to say her name. So the sort of core, well, the 4 core movies for Sid were My Summer of Love, Stealing Beauty on one hand, and then on the other hand, Secret Garden and How to Make an American Quilt. So it was like,
oh my gosh.
So how do we roll all these into one and do something? But yeah, this idea, though, it was the very rare, weird instance where a title sort of came first. I mean, and that's something that I don't think I've actually ever said. And then I was like, okay, so how do I move sort of backwards into this title with this story? And it was, oh, maybe there's a sort of fictional, sort of not MacGuffin, but like a mythical sort of center of power that this can spring from.
This reminds me, I want to just make sure I say it before we go on, because we didn't say it up front, that Princess Sid and two of your other films, Henry Gamble's Birthday Party and The Wise Kids, are all going to be available on the Criterion channel starting in August, in this month, very soon. Is today August? Tomorrow's August.
Tomorrow's August.
What's the actual date that they're going to be available to stream?
I mean, if past months are any indication, that everything's kind of dumped at the beginning. The movies are there, and then they're featured throughout. So
they might be there now.
I assume that the movies will be there tomorrow, but the feature will be on. I think they'll feature it August 27th at the end of the month.
Okay, so everyone look for that.
Yeah, thanks.
I'm still processing the like square of those 4 titles that you cited, because I think they've like, I remember How to Make an American Quilt so viscerally, but haven't thought about it in maybe 10 years.
Well, it's not great. It's pretty good, but it's a miracle in terms of this idea that it exists at all. and that as Hollywood studio made this film about a young girl reconnecting with her, the older women in her life, we don't really get those movies anymore. But what was exciting to me was not just, it's one thing to maybe have an opportunity to pitch a movie like that to a studio. It's another thing to say, I'm going to raise maybe $100,000 very quickly. What can I do that's new in the micro budget realm? So it's kind of it's a twofold sort of goal. Of one hand, I'm inspired to make something now like this. On the other hand, can I do it for cheap and still have the same kind of magical feeling that those 30, 40, $50 million movies had then?
And you're so right that this was a category of movie that was actually active and in that time period. Like I'm thinking of like Joy Luck Club and Divine Secrets of the Yaya Sisterhood, which there's a discussion to be had about the individual merit of those particular films, but the fact that this category existed and was somewhat robust, the like reconnect with the like network of an older generation of women in your life is pretty interesting. And
yeah, Fried Green Tomatoes.
Yeah, but like and that it could exist in a like mainstream world, like that was deemed as valuable and marketable in a mainstream sense is actually great, even if you don't love every single one of those movies.
Yeah, and it's very moving, actually. I mean, Michael and I talked about it a couple weeks ago of just like, of me, I grew up in kind of NASCAR country, Florence, Darlington, South Carolina, a small city of maybe 30, 40,000 people, a couple of movie theaters, maybe 7 or 8 movies at a time. And these were all there, Yeah. The fact that a teenager in small town South Carolina could go to the theater with their mom or their dad and see movies like this it's very touching. I'm sure there's an optimistic spin on this that says, and now they can watch them with their families on the couch, streaming 24/7 or whatever. But there's something about the care, attention of moviegoing in those days that really directed people's energy in a more specific way, a less distracted way that I think probably in small ways helped nurture younger people.
I think we should bring in Bedatri to this conversation, even though I don't want to stop the flow of this conversation. I want to continue it with more voices.
It's like a river. These are rivers. We're all rivers. Michael, we're all rivers here. Come on.
I actually was just thinking about how The Joy Luck Club was the only film I ever saw with my grandparents, ever.
Really?
Oh, wow.
My father's parents.
Oh, that's a fun
You're
name.
here. Come on in. I was hoping that she would appear.
There she is.
Welcome.
Hello.
Bedatri, you have a very glamorous still photo that keeps reminding me that like I could really get it together in this department.
No, but it also is like a photo from my travels, and remember when we used to do that thing? So I put that on so that I can reminisce about the days we could travel.
Well, it's wonderful to see you.
Thanks for joining us. Eid Mubarak.
Eid Mubarak to everyone here. And Farihah, just to go back to your old point about people asking if wondering if there are too many Eids, there can never be enough Eids.
Well, Eid is of course, most holidays, particularly those that have a long history, involve gathering. But I think Eid in particular, because it's not just that you gather in one place or you be with your family. At least the way that my family celebrates it, like everyone in the community has an open house. They tell you when their hours are, I'll be home 3 to 5. Great. I'll be home 5 to 6. And you just make the rounds and you do exactly all the things that we're not supposed to do anymore, but that bring us so much pleasure, which is you get all decked up and then you have the best of what everybody cooks in their particular homes and families one by one throughout the day, like 12 to 15 meals. And yeah, so there's never enough of that. But I'll try to recreate it at home a little bit. Is there anything, Bedatri, that you've been thinking about since we talked that you have come around on recently?
Coincidentally, I've been reading and watching a few films where the really vivacious, fantastic female protagonist is killed off. So, sorry. But
that end of the sentence was unexpected.
No, I'm talking about, I recently reread Mill on the Floss. I was watching Pothe Pachali, and Thelma and Louise actually has been a very favorite film of mine. Then I rewatched it and I'm like, but why do they die? Why do they have to die, So I don't know if it's a sharp coming around, but I'm I think I would have liked that film way better if they just lived on or didn't drive off into the cliff. So that's one. And
agree with that, by the way.
Yeah,
that's has such a corollary with this sort of frequent point of discussion in queer cinema about how the stories that often end in death, or if there's a queer character in a film that's otherwise populated by straight people, they're a tragic moral tale that has to die so you can learn something. So it's a pretty strong parallel. You were just too strong, had to learn your lesson.
And this is probably because I grew up in India. I really was very anti films from the UK. I really wanted to do nothing with that. I'm no, you guys, no. But recently, of course, the first person to change my mind about that in the recent past has been Lynn Ramsey. But I have been watching a few Sally Porter films, which have kind of been British cinema is not that bad.
Which Sally Potter films have made it into your rotation?
I've been it's one of those things where I just picked it up and I watched Orlando. I watched
That's a special film.
Tango Lesson. Ginger and Rosa. Yeah. So I've watched a few of Sally Potter films, and I've come around to the idea of watching films made by British people.
Orlando is distinct in being simultaneously so rooted in British culture because it's a historical tale, while also being not about that, about something so much more expansive and such a different conception of gender identity than people talked about openly or widely when the film came out. I feel we're just starting to engage with gender identity in the way that it's depicted in the book and then in the movie adaptation, which is really special. And then Jeff is making this point that I wanted to bring up, actually, which we watched it at a film festival on a 35 millimeter print, and the reels were out of order. So the fourth one came up during the third one or something, and I was I was like, oh, I guess they're just being very bold. I had never seen the film before. It seemed reasonable in the framework that they had set up. And it's like amazing when a film still works like that.
As you recall, Farihah, I had introduced that screening with like a 5-minute pseudo-academic talk, introducing this film to this theater full of mostly 65 and older people. And so I was giving them the lowdown on what to expect from it. And I love it so much that I sat and I watched it until that moment, and I realized that it suddenly skipped ahead, like all the way to like the Constantinople scenes, and then it jumped back to the England scenes, and I thought, oh no, the reels are out of order, and I was so upset that I left. And then later, you told me that, yeah, you know.
It kind of works.
It kind of worked.
Still played.
I know that, I believe that Eric has a real affection for Happy Go Lucky. I just suddenly remembered his reverse shot review, actually.
So we're talking about Mike, before we talk about Mike Lee, if we're talking about the value of British cinema.
Wait, let me guess.
Before we go broad.
You know
Terrence Davies. Terrence Davies?
Terrence Davies, yes.
Sit here. I can't sit here and let an entire national cinema be impugned because of Terrence Davies. Otherwise, you can have it.
To be fair, she was obliquely referencing colonizing, so
Yes.
it's kind of a fair reason to come at it with a chip on your shoulder.
I completely understand.
I grew up watching a lot of British movies, and also like lived in India for about 10 years growing up, even though my family's Bangladeshi. And I feel like I had to have a different kind of thought shift, which was like, I did grow up watching these. Have I internalized some like do I need to decolonize my mind about something in a way that I haven't considered when I was younger, because I've just like absorbed this particular way of like understanding social relationships or something. Like, is there something secretly nefarious in the British romantic comedy style that I haven't considered?
I mean, to be honest, when I watched Notting Hill, I absolutely loved it. I mean, yeah, I was very young, Hugh Grant, what's not to love? But then you think about it, then you go to Notting Hill and you see so many people of color around, and I'm like, how are they never in these films?
Well, we had Ash Clark on the show a couple of times, I think, and he talked about a strand of activist filmmaking from BIPOC filmmakers in the UK that I sort of had started to think about already in the last few months, was totally absent from my understanding of British cinema. It was like so driven by white filmmakers.
Mm-hmm.
And it was a coming around that was only because I didn't know it existed before. But like Ayo Akingbade, like all these people, and throughout the 80s and 90s, like talking about all the things that we're coming back to now around like how housing is a right, and all of these economic and social issues are tied into racial justice, as also a big tradition in British cinema that I had just not been aware of.
Right, and My Beautiful Laundrette also came up recently as a topic, which I think is kind of a mold breaker for British cinema.
Did you have any particular relationship with animated film in the way that Stephen was talking about?
No, I think I've always liked the old Disney animated films, but what I recently warmed up to was the whole Japanese animation film, like the whole world of Japanese animation, which I mean I really like, but it was just something that I wasn't introduced to, when I was younger or like before I started studying film. But I mean, I really like it. I mean, it's like when you say I like animation films, it doesn't mean much, because what kind of animation, all those things. But I really like the Japanese animation films, and I think I have seen it when I had just come into New York. I think they had like this whole week-long showcase of like old Japanese animation films, which I really enjoyed.
That's interesting to bring up anime, because that is it's like a sort of a different topic, but it's related, which it's a gap for me. like I've seen some of the big titles, right? You know, the Akiras and Princess Mononoke's and Spirited Away, but I've never really gone terribly deep into the catalog. And it always makes me feel like I'm missing out on a very major part of film history. It's something that I have to, it's like a project that I have to do for myself. And because of that, like you might catch me saying, well, you know, I don't really like anime, which is ridiculous because there isn't a single film that I don't like. It's just a genre that I've never dove into, and I really have to do that. It's a huge gap for me.
Well, it seems really daunting.
It does.
That genre especially. It kind of like spins out in so many different directions, and I find it hard to even think about kind of how you penetrate that.
I didn't scratch the surface of, I didn't even see Spirited Away till last year. I or Totoro, I mean, I hadn't seen any of them, but just not because I was like actively disinterested. It just wasn't the realm that I was sort of prioritizing in these years. And so it's been a little bit it's kind of mind blowing to I mean, Spirited Away, since I saw it last year, I stopped thinking about the train ride at the end. And it's such an incredible thing. Yeah, I felt like I was too Disney focused earlier, but obviously there are things. I've always been a champ for the good dinosaur, and which I love a lot. And yeah, seeing Spirited Away was sort of mind blowing, but it is funny. I would never discard an entire genre of movie, but and like I said, I've been very moved by certain ones over the years, but something about the last 2 years has really made me excited by that world, and excited by all of the sort of, even the kind of canon Miyazaki that I haven't seen.
Oh yeah, I mean, it's canon for a reason. Some not, I don't think that applies everywhere, but those films I think are canon for a reason. There's like such a sophistication in terms of its like emotional landscape, the kinds of stories and what they're interested in telling, that and I think that like create this like beautiful fabric together. I'm a big Miyazaki fan, and I appreciate I don't know, there's something about his like willingness to engage with like unrelenting melancholy in stories that are ostensibly for children that I just think, you know, maybe we should prepare them for the world being hard and sad while also like providing these avenues of like wonder and joy.
Cat bus and sadness.
Cat bus, but sad.
Shout out, because I know also one of our writers, Caden, is watching. We can't forget Chuck Jones and the Looney Tunes. I mean, and I thought of that because Caden's written so brilliantly about it and thought about it so much. And every time I go back and rewatch, you know, a Bugs Bunny short, or Roadrunner, I'm blown away by the invention and the brilliance of it. So there's a world out there of animation that that's been a part of my life since I was young, but I've never thought about too much as a film person, as a film person. So you kind of take those things for granted. I'm also really interested in this idea of the things you appreciate more as you get older because you're so astonished by the craft of it. I don't want to interrupt. Someone's telling me to shut up.
No, I think I was just trying to say that I've been avoiding watching Grave of Fireflies. Like, you know, I have been watching, I'm like, this is not a good time to watch Grave of Fireflies.
I mean, it might be because you need, I don't know. It's always hard to tell. It can go one of two directions. But it was one of those films that I almost had to like not really plan too far in advance to watch it. It had to come up last minute, and then I did, and then I spent like several days devastated.
I remember I watched it in like one film class at NYU, and I remember just like sitting in the auditorium and crying for like a good 40 minutes, and then had such a bad headache that I just went home, didn't do the rest of the classes. Yeah,
like, and I guess it also, I immediately had this sort of instinctive link to the human condition, because I was like, when was the last time I felt this horrible after watching a movie, or, you know, felt this sort of like emotionally drained? And it just goes to show that like length and this fixation on like a certain kind of length for films is really irrelevant, because it does in, you know, 70 minutes, like many of the same things that, which is not to say it's better or did anything better, but that like it just in a different way of telling the story and through the you know, perspective of children, and in this completely other length, it
Yeah.
made me contemplate the same things about death, grief, war, and like families being torn apart.
Yeah.
I feel like there's one of the things that's come up is like there's genres that we haven't engaged with for specific reasons, like Bedatri and talking about how British films were just like not something you wanted to really deal with as a younger person. There's genres that we haven't engaged with because we just haven't, like there's not enough time and it didn't necessarily catch your interest. But I also feel like there's a category of genres that we haven't engaged in because we're just like irrationally not interested. Not like, oh, it hasn't entered, like Michael, you didn't think anime was dumb or that you weren't curious about it. It just didn't come up. I feel like I have some block about like prison movies and gangster movies. And that is such a broad category. It's like almost as broad as like saying animation, where there's so much that happens within those kinds of stories, but I like need to be convinced in advance and sort of told what's going to happen that's going to do it for me, because the structure itself like leaves me very cold.
Yeah, I find in this, so Michael knows this about me really well, but like when we first met and started Reverse Shot, I had seen almost none of the classic horror films. And it was just, I grew up, I was too scared of them. I wouldn't go see those kinds of movies with my friends. I wouldn't do it. And so now he's helped catch me up over the years about the things that I should see. But in quarantine, I found that the movies that I've drawn almost the most comfort from are these Hammer horror films that we've taped off of TCM. And if we can't think of something to watch on on any given night, I just want to go to a Hammer horror film, whether it's like The Devil Rides Out or The Gorgon or, Curse of Dracula. I mean, they all have the same like kinds of elements, and they're not scary in the way like say like The Shining is scary or Halloween is scary, but there is something about them that just I find being in those sets and those places with Peter Cushing and Christopher Lee, it's like a homecoming. And now I'm craving those experiences with those films, and it's just like it's so easy to cue them up and just pop them on.
Has anybody tried to watch one of the Unfriended films since quarantine started?
Oh, since quarantine started?
Yeah.
That's interesting.
Not since, but
No, I watched it before.
I love them. I watched them both before, but I haven't watched them since the start, and I wonder how my reaction would be now.
I think I'm having a sort of prelim reaction to all the Zoom movies that are going to come out over the next couple of years, and I am sort of already not into them, and so maybe I don't know.
I know you kind of want to reject that out.
What?
Somebody posted on my Twitter feed today like this new Shudder movie called Host, and it's I guess it's like a Zoom horror movie, and somebody was praising it. It's like, oh, the first great Zoom horror movie, and I thought, there's no way.
I'm excited for like maybe the one that is good. I mean, you don't you, Michael, like or at least admired Paranormal Activity?
Yes.
I mean, yeah. I mean, it's to this day, it's the only movie that's made me turn on a light in the middle of the night just because I needed to sleep soundly, and certainly there's the potential for some exciting thrills. But I don't know how you do it like 3 times,
I get
and like I particularly worry about that in documentary space, like how all these films are going to films that were already in production are going to navigate that becoming part of the story. And then on a separate note, like the spate of films that are immediately about, directly engaging with what COVID is, and that it was important to bear witness to this time, but how, like you said, Stephen, there's only so many films that can engage with that in a way that where it makes sense, and where the form really served the way that they were talking about the experience of it. And I know there's going to be a bit a massive sorting through how do I feel about this and how is it working?
So many bad COVID documentaries. I can't wait. It's going to be so good.
Bedatri, what are the films or film that has made you turn on the lights in the middle of the night?
All of them. I think I'm that person who cannot sleep, shouts in her sleep after watching a horror film. I think Rosemary's Baby, Exorcism of Emily Rose. I think at one point my mother put her foot down and said, no, you're not watching any of these because you're a mess for the next few days. And this is when I used to live with them. And I think I just stopped. But, having said that, I was very, I was very scared going into watching Us. But it was a different kind of scary. So I think that is the kind of scary I'm okay with. But I'm that person who'll probably have the lights on to start.
Like the lights will not be turned off.
It's I'm not a horror movie person at all, and it's especially like shrieks and spooks or something. And I'm like, and there have been times when I've sat on the floor and watched it because I've been too scared to sit on a chair and something coming out under the chair or sofa or something. So I've just sat on the floor and watched horror films. I'm not a horror movie person. It's a block.
This makes me think of a subcategory of what we're talking about, which is films that we want to come around on desperately, but we just can't. And for me, I was thinking this because it's a horror film. I just have never liked The Exorcist. I've never found it scary. I've never found it interesting. I don't like anything about it. But I watch it over and over and over again. Because I tell myself, well, you must like this because you keep watching it because you want to like it. And every time I watch it, I don't like it again. And I'm like, why don't I like this? And I think I've seen it 8 times and I still don't like it.
I think for me, it's like gore. Like, when I say I don't like gore, people think I'm prudish, but I really don't have the stomach for it. So I keep watching it to build an appetite. And it's like the same thing, Michael. Like, people would assume I love it when I'm watching Evil Dead or something like that. But it's just really like vetting myself to accept more of that.
Sure. I mean, Evil Dead, but like, that's just a particular example. Like, I would go back to Evil Dead again and again. Evil Dead 2, I don't care about the first one, because there is that joy to it. There's kind of like this ecstasy to it. Mm-hmm. The Exorcist is just, I think it might just have something to do with not being a Christian. I don't know. I'm just, the fears of that film are not fears that I have or think about. Stephen, I do wonder, now that I'm talking about this, if The Exorcist you find particularly scary. I have friends who say that that's the scariest movie. When they think of it, that the idea of the devil, the idea of the devil entering you and perverting the body is somehow the scariest thing. For me, it's completely alien.
No, I don't love it because it's scary, and in fact, I think the third one is scarier. But no, I love it because I'm always amazed in all at its ability to be as successful a domestic drama as it is a horror film, and I'm always stunned at the very sort of actionless, sort of dramaless first half, and at how sort of exquisitely textured it is. And
I would agree that it's actionless
and active, but I have to say, let me say this, and I promise I'm not trying to get revenge on Michael by bringing up a movie that's dear to him, but that I have the exact same experience with Blowout, and I just watched it again for like the 10th time last week, trying to be moved by it in some way, like trying to have this, because it's largely considered, and I love De Palma, and I go on a De Palma kick yearly, and I love so many. That movie has never clicked with me on any emotional level whatsoever, and I understand that ending is such a gut punch for so many people, and every time, just like you watch The Exorcist, I watch Blowout thinking, maybe it'll gut me this time, maybe my heart will break, and it doesn't. So that's my thing, my movie that I'm trying to love.
That's bold of you to admit, and I feel for you. Blowout does completely wreck me.
I realize I'm in a minority.
No, it's good to not agree with the crowd.
But so many others do. I mean, Snake Eyes and Mission to Mars I adore, and I'm deeply moved by Femme Fatale and Carrie, and I love The Fury. I love all of them. Casualties of War I just watched 2 weeks ago, and Something about Blowout, though. I don't know.
That's so strange. Then, if you like all those movies and that's the one that doesn't work, that is very interesting. And
I say it doesn't work. I'm not. It's not like I'm bored. I'm
genuinely fascinated by that.
I just appreciate that you're willing to go, but like that Michael, Stephen, and Bedatri, you're like, my response to not liking something is to just watch it again and again to figure out what's going on and see if I might change. I do the same thing. I have a like severe and pretty disgusting response to an allergy, and every couple of years I'm like, but maybe like I could have more in my life. If only I could. If only I could absorb this protein, the world would open up to me. Maybe that's why you keep revisiting. You're like, I want to experience more.
I have another one, but I don't want to like suck up all the air. If someone else has one, like,
I want to know what Eric's come around on.
Actually, I had a question for Bedatri about this, because you were talking about the discovering or being open to UK films at this point. And I'm curious, I'm mindful of a piece that Farihah wrote years ago about Indiana Jones and the Temple of Doom, and writing this sort of piece about one of the most problematic films ever made, and writing this really nuanced piece about that film. And I'm curious if there are any films like that are just so problematic and yet you also can't help but respond to it in some way. I mean, Notting Hill sort of applies in some ways. I'm curious if there's a film like that.
I mean, there's obviously films which everyone else likes and you don't like because of where you come from. Mm-hmm. For me, something like Dunkirk is like that, where, you know, I mean, I agree the music is great. I agree the cinematography is great, but it's, to me, I just can't get over the fact that it's a lie. Mm. You know, so I think Dunkirk is an example. There was another film on Churchill, which I wrote a bit on, called The Darkest Hour. Yep. Churchill is like this fantastic person, and I'm like, no, I can't get over this. I mean, sure, Gary Oldman probably is looking very nice with his prosthetic makeup, maybe, but I cannot look beyond the fact that this was a man who engineered a famine, you know? So things like that. And especially with war movies, I feel that a lot. And like, you know, as problematic as war itself is, to make a film on that, it just gets doubly problematic as to who's telling what story. Yeah.
War films are where the lies often are. Like, I remember, in terms of the film I came around on negatively, I remember growing up, just because it's fed to us as a classic, I remember growing up watching The Deer Hunter, thinking it was somehow good.
Oh, sure, yeah.
Watched it again a few years ago. I mean, not only is like, are the war sequences racist and disturbing and kind of terrible, I found the whole thing to be just a sham. I found the whole thing to be poorly constructed. I thought it was like pseudo Altman. I hated every single second of it. And I actually don't like Cimino in general. I don't really like Heaven's Gate. I find to be kind of a crock too, but which is weirdly the anti opinion now, the way that film culture comes around. I probably shouldn't have admitted those things, but I will. But just because I'm doing this, and because
now we're here.
Tell us what else you freshly hate, Michael.
I don't hate. I do not. I'm going to mention. I do not hate this movie, but it's in the Exorcist campus. Again, I think the Exorcist is like a well-made movie that I can't figure out. I can't find a way into. So then this is actually a movie that I watched at the very beginning of quarantine for like the 6th or 7th time in my life, trying to like it. Blue Velvet. I just can't. I do not like Blue Velvet. I have to finally admit to myself, I don't like it. I like certain sequences, and because I disliked it when I was younger, I resisted Lynch for a while, and then I came around on Lynch, and I just absolutely adore Mulholland Drive. I adored the Twin Peaks Return. I love Lost Highway. I love The Elephant Man. I love Eraserhead. Blue Velvet does not work for me at all. And
Michael, I kind of am exactly in your camp.
Oh, that's nice to know.
We've made peace over the course of this hour. The tension that was strewn as a result of the Exorcist issue has been resolved.
But again, I would say,
I agree too. Sorry.
I mean, I would say that it's not that I dislike it; it's that I keep watching it, wanting to be moved by it. Similarly to Blowout, and it hasn't happened. So it's not that I'm like watching these movies over and over and I'm like, this sucks. It's like I'm trying to find my way in. But I think that's why, it actually is a worthy endeavor if you have the time because movies are these fascinating contraptions, and they can be, and some of the best of them, even if we don't respond to them, is like it's like having some sort of strange contraption on your shelf that you're just trying to figure out how it's built or how it works, and my brain is just going to Dave Kerr has this review of The Shining that's a bad review, and The Shining is maybe in my top 10 of all time, but his bad review is so brilliant that it makes me love the movie more. And what I love and what I love about it is that he really engages with it. It's really fascinating. It's in one of the compilations, but one of the reasons I love him so much as a writer is because he's got a whole section of bad reviews for Dressed to Kill in Nashville and The Shining, and they're like 6 pages long, and they're just so smart and so engaging. And anyway, I read it again the other night. It's like, it's the only bad review in existence that I go to for active positive inspiration because of how excitingly and thrillingly he's engaging with the movie.
I love that. And I feel like it's something I couldn't do. Like if I were to write about Blue Velvet, it wouldn't be, I'm going to tear this down and show you all the holes, that I'm going to poke all the holes in it. It would be like a wrestling with it and trying to figure out what about it isn't working. I don't know if I have it, but Dave Kerr has that amazing ability to just kind of.
I treasure that man's writing, I have to say.
But also, I mean, this brings me to a conversation I was having with Susanna a few hours back. You know how knowing critics and having critics as friends, you're constantly coming around. Because I remember, and like, I absolutely don't know why, but I did not like Let the Sunshine In when I first watched it. And then Susanna talked to me about it. And, I was like, whoa, okay, I did not see those things. Let me watch it again. And I really liked it the second time. So, I mean, as critics, as like, as having critics as friends, I think it's such a boon because, I mean, it's a boon and a bane, more boon because they always have like these little things that you don't see, and it helps coming around to things. So it makes it, and like same, I think, when I said at the Critics Academy, when I said I hate British film, I think Naomi came up to me and said, wait, let me tell you some good ones, so I really treasure that.
To that point, that's, I've certainly, with some of the people in this actual virtual room as well as beyond, I don't have anything at the moment to talk about in terms of still not being able to find my way in, as Stephen was saying, but more of memories of films that I could not respond to at all the first time, that 5, 10 years, 15 years later, I could. And probably the thing that sort of sticks out, which is probably the most embarrassing to admit considering my relationship with the films now, is the Linklaters Before trilogy, which was, and I think I knew where I was coming from. I think I knew where my resistance was, and it was an honest resistance. And I remember, like, Michael having conversations with you, and it was like simply impossible that you could like and respect me and that I could somehow not respond to Before Sunset. And it was in that situation, it was so much that it was about my generation. It was about people almost exactly the same age as I was, doing things in ways or communicating in ways that I resisted, either because I found it dishonest or because I found it too performative or because I found it abhorrent, whatever it may be. And my fighting with those characters and those environments was the primary relationship I had with it. And then I found that seeing Before Sunrise, when I saw Before Sunset, absolutely, I was blown away by the previous film, and actually was revisiting Before Sunset when Before Midnight came out, that I was ready for that and remembered all the conversations that I'd had and the responses that people had for it previously. So I needed that time, and I also needed to absorb some of the other perspectives before I was really ready to sort of respond to it. And so the moral of the happy ending is that when Before Midnight came out, I was very ready for it, and that is not a film that I resisted at first viewing.
I think we should raise a glass to Before Midnight.
That's very specific. I thought Bedatri gave us a perfect toast, which is
true, actually.
The boon and the bane.
The boon and the bane.
Here's to having critic friends.
Yeah. The boon and the bane of it all.
Who's opening the beer? I like the sound of the opening beer was good.
That was me.
That was Bedatri.
This Bedatri is great.
It's wine in a can.
Yeah, excuse me, Eric.
Not beer.
The assumptions we make at this point.
Don't fixate on the container. You don't know what it holds within.
To continue our tradition, to thank the reverse shotters out at home who are joining us and are invisible, but in our hearts. Are Matt Connolly, Ryan Swen, Susanna Gruder, Caden Mark Gardner, Chris Wisniewski, Devika Girish, Jordan Kronk, and Edo Choi. Thanks for joining us. Thank you all for joining us.
Thanks, everyone.
Thanks, everybody.
So
Good to
much,
see you.
Stephen.
Good to
Have
see
a
you,
great
Stephen and
weekend.
Bedatri.
We're so happy to have you. Come back.
This has been the best.
We'll take our
Oh, also, wait, sorry. I have cake in honor of Princess Sid, which I will not eat on camera, but just letting you know that I do have cake in honor of Princess.
Can you give us more details? Like, what's the flavor?
It's red velvet
Ah,
from this place called Lloyd's Carrot Cake. They ran out of carrot cake, so I bought red velvet.
thank you for that gesture.
I'm going to force us to wait for one extra minute because we're talking about Princess Sid, and I did not see in the Q&A, somebody asked
Thank you, Jeff.
Stephen about your love for Benjamin Button regarding, so like as a, if you don't mind just quickly broaching that, because I feel bad that we didn't notice that question before. And then and then also just as a note, after he does that, we're going to sort of slowly disappear, but we're also going to have some exit music that is near and dear to Stephen and to many other people out there. So
Yes,
Stephen.
my sister, Frances Cohn, Spotify, lots of time to listen. Yes, Michael.
Oh, sorry. Before you talk about Benjamin Button, I just wanted to make sure people know that Bedatri's talking about cake related to Princess Sid because there's an incredible scene with an incredible monologue. It's all about that starts
two incredible scenes with two incredible monologues with cake.
Perfectly written and perfectly delivered. Those are not easy. Easy to land, and it feels so right and real.
One of my favorite things.
I don't recall any cake in Benjamin Button.
I can't believe you're asking. I never feel put on the spot, but I feel put on the spot, but not in an unhealthy way. No, I mean, actually, I mean, it's a great it's a great connector back to this sort of how tinkering with technology can actually lift out of process and become something very kind of sacred. And to me, there's no movie that uses all the modes of cinema and technology at the moment that it was made to express so achingly the passing of time as that movie. And there is no movie that I can think of that feels as melancholy about the march of time and of life as that film. So I just think it's just a deeply special movie, and with a few exceptions, I don't trust anyone who doesn't see any value at all in it.
Yeah, it's pretty awesome.
Yeah.
You did very well on the spot, Stephen, and wrapped it up perfectly for the entire conversation.
Good.
Hang out here if you'd like, but I'm going to start playing music, and I'm going to start saying goodbye to everybody. Thanks again for everybody.
Stephen, you really put a button on it.
No, you put a button on it.
You guys are pretty as a button.